I was quite surprised to the reaction of my No Fap video I released on Wednesday. It was a very fun one to make and very, very bizarre. But I did say in that video I was going to make a part 2 at some point. I said next week, but because that video did so well, let's just do it this week. So what we were talking about on Wednesday, so please go check that out. Or maybe go to it after you watch this, I don't really care what order you do it in. But basically we were talking about NoFap and like the fragile masculinity involved in it, and why people believe the most crazy things like semen retention can allow you into the quantum realm. Like, I'm not joking about that. Or that it can give you superpowers and it can help you build muscle and grow a beard and become more attractive to women and stuff like that. Honestly, very, very bizarre. I will play you a couple clips in the video just to outline how crazy this stuff is. But today what I wanted to talk about was the politics of this all and the political theory that goes along with like No Nut November and No Fap, and why the far right love this stuff and the conspiracy theories they use to push this stuff, and just the really like Puritan worldview they have where they think this stuff is so like morally wrong. So I want to talk about groups like the Proud Boys. I want to talk about cultural Marxism, because that always comes into things like this, Jordan Peterson's favorite conspiracy theory, and then we'll just summarize the whole NoFap concept. But before we get any further, I want to plug my socials and Patreon for about 1 minute. Timestamps down in the description, so please skip if you're not interested. Before we get any further, a lot of my work on this channel is demonetized because when you're covering more serious, sometimes edgier topics, YouTube doesn't like this. So if you've ever enjoyed my work, please consider becoming a patron. And you don't have to pledge a crazy amount. I want to build up my Patreon based on as many people as possible pledging little amounts, like $1 or $2. So if you feel like I have ever brought anything that's worthwhile into your life and my content, please really consider becoming a patron to help me continue to do this regardless of if YouTube monetize or not most of my videos in a given month. Also, if you want to join our communities, come check out our Discord and my subreddit. Those links in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, please check out the Kavernacle at Twitter, at Instagram, and also my personal Reddit, where you can keep up to date with all my content and what I'm doing. For every 5k, we get a new chocolate orange. Help me get one more before the end of the year. I believe we need about 1,000 or so more subscribers, so I feel like we can do that in a month. So please help me get there, and won't it look so nice? Again, I don't really know how I'm going to structure the pyramid because that is pretty perfect right now. Do we just go like Eiffel Tower style, just keep going up or something? Let me know down in the comments. I also live stream on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and I archive all those streams on the Kavernacle Extra. That is my second channel. Please go check that out as well. So like I said at the start of the video, my previous one was on NoFap and semen retention. Now, before we go any further, just in case you haven't seen that video, I quickly want to play some clips I used from these, I guess, YouTubers who subscribe to this type of thinking. So here is someone describing the superpowers they got from it, and here is another person describing how you can get to the quantum realm through doing this.
When you accumulate all the benefits of the vitamins and minerals within semen, you'll see why those who practice semen retention experience mental superpowers like increased confidence and discipline, an increased state of well-being, decreased depression, increased motivation, increased mental clarity, better memory and focus. Physical superpowers such as increased energy, less hours of sleep to feel well rested, increased stamina, increased muscle growth, thicker hair, a deeper voice, and faster healing and repair of muscle, wounds, and bone fractures. These I have all experienced on my own personal journey.
But the reason why most videos fall short is that they do not adequately explain how should you transmute your semen energy into other creative outlets. The possibilities of what you can do with it are literally endless because your mind is limitless. And getting a great looking and functioning body is going to be just one of the very basic benefits that you will enjoy. The transmutation process is mental. And if your mind is under duress, then you cannot expect it to perform an active transmutation on this energy. This energy literally can be used as an orgasm in the brain to induce mystical and euphoric experiences, because it unlocks the creative part of the brain by providing sufficient energy to operate. Therefore, you can manifest any outcome you want from the quantum realm with this energy.
Like, I was laughing a lot when I made that video, and it's just so bizarre. Like, one of the craziest things I've probably ever heard in my life. But the main serious point of that video is that if you start to believe absolute nonsense like this about medical science and your health in general, you are really open to believing a lot of conspiracy theories and also just rejecting common medical consensus. We are seeing that across the world at the moment, thanks to people like Joe Rogan, who use their platform to spout all this medical misinformation. Like I said, I want to go into the serious side. I want to go into the politics of this stuff. And would you know, there is an undercurrent of No Fap and No Nut November that is actually deeply anti-Semitic. So to start with, I want to talk about something that happened a couple years ago to show you how this stuff really manifests. So Vice reporting, let this be the last No Nut November. So they're talking about a story where X-Hamster, an adult content site, posted, yes, No Fappers, this year we're bringing it. Nut November, yes, fat, porn is good for you. Refuse to let anti-sex killjoys like Fight the New Drug and Gail Dines and No Porn November win with bad science, all hands on deck. But people on the far right started posting these pictures underneath the tweet. So here is one. Porn use increases depression and anxiety. When addicts turn to pornography to alleviate depression and anxiety that only make things worse, they must die. Support capital punishment for pornographers. Here's another one, and check out this one. Look at that caricature. A guy who looks like a very anti-Semitic stereotype of a Jewish man behind a pile of money, and it says the internet has been a significant factor in 62% of divorces in 2002. Of those cases, 56% involved porn. The role it plays in divorce has only increased since then. It undermines marriage and wrecks homes. Here's another one, which is just as anti-Semitic. The average age of first exposure to this stuff is 11, sending them into a downward spiral of addiction, shame, depression, anxiety, desensitization, promiscuity. Why the hell would you let this happen? So X-Hamster did respond to this, saying they were concerned about the imagery being used, and the official NoFap account said, saw anti-Semitism, bigotry on Twitter today. To be clear, we have many Jewish users quitting porn. Blaming an entire religion for porn is ridiculous. Also, AA isn't concerned with the religions of some of those who still brew alcohol. We also only care about recovery. So a lot of you who have read about like history and, you know, read into the cultural Marxism conspiracy, you might have an idea of why people would think this, but I want to go into it a bit further. Because obviously part of cultural Marxism is these scholars and these philosophers advocating for sexual liberalization. But of course, people like Jordan Peterson and loads of people on the far right believe the Frankfurt School is at the heart of a conspiracy, mainly a Jewish conspiracy, to take over the world through pushing Marxism, very in the vein of Judeo-Bolshevism from the 1920s, 30s and 40s. So that's why you have the presence of very anti-Semitic memes there. But an article by Rolling Stone in 2019, how a new meme exposes the far-right roots of No Nut November. So an extremist version of this far-right anti-masturbation philosophy has been promoted by David Duke, who has propagated the conspiracy that Jews dominate the porn industry and use pornography as a way to control white men. On far-right threads on the encrypted messaging app Telegram, this sentiment is fairly widespread. Quote, Jews not only control most of the pornography industry, they also rely on the goyim to maintain a routine of ejaculation in order to stay docile and non-violent. One comment reads, another shared a viral Pornhub tweet poking fun at viewers who failed No Nut November, writing, the Jew mocks you as they poison the minds of millions. This anti-Semitism is often accompanied by healthy doses of homophobia and racism. On these threads, you'll frequently see users deriding men who masturbate to heterosexual porn on the grounds that being aroused by another man's penis makes you gay. And because mainstream pornography often features white women paired with black men, there's also a racist element to much of this discourse, such as the suggestion that interracial porn is intended to steer white women away from procreating with white men and towards men of color. Obviously, that is very common in the cultural Marxism conspiracy as well, and just general conspiracies about Jewish people and their links to Marxism, is that the push for racial equality is to undermine like Western civilization and the white man. It's pretty key in like white replacement theories. So the irony of this strain of the movement is that while it's intended to fight the larger porn industry's attempt to brainwash and emasculate white men, its ideology has historically been used as a tool by fascist figures to gain social control, cultural stigma associated with masturbation, combined with the fact that pretty much everyone does it, invariably leads to a lot of men developing a lot of internal shame, and that makes them open to manipulation and social control. So Jewish people using Marxism and various other means to subvert Western society has, of course, been a widespread conspiracy for over 100 years at this point, probably even longer. And that's why I hate Jordan Peterson so much, because his rabid anti-leftism makes him push these conspiracy theories that only need you to add the Jewish part on top of what he's saying, because he talks about the Frankfurt School, cultural Marxism and everything like that. The only thing he doesn't talk about is that this is actually a Jewish conspiracy. Instead, it's like a Marxist conspiracy because they lost the Cold War. So I want to delve a bit deeper into this conspiracy theory about the porn industry. So another article, Why the Alt-Right Thinks Porn is a Jewish Conspiracy Theory. Recently, Paul Nealon, running for Paul Ryan's seat in Congress, had a tweet linked to a video titled The Jewish Role in the Porn Industry. The same day, February 11th, Twitter suspended his account. The video in question was made by Mark Collette, former director of the BMP. Since it was posted 9 months ago, the video has garnered 80,000 views. Collette's argument is this: Jews had a disproportionate presence in the porn industry since the 1970s, and they aren't just motivated by profit, they actually mean harm to Western civilization too. Young white men, Collette claims, became addicted to porn at an early age to the point where they're less and less interested or even capable of sex. Furthermore, these young men's addiction drives them to pursue ever greater highs as the porn they used to watch no longer works for them. So they end up hooked on gay and trans categories and interracial categories featuring black men and white women. Supposedly, the goal of this addictive material is to neuter and desexualize white men and ultimately doom the white race. This is where the alt-right theory of porn ties into the larger theory of white replacement. The immigration of people of colour into Europe and North America, coupled with the declining birth rates among white couples, will render white people a minority, and then Jews will be the only high IQ race left in the West, leaving them free to control the black and brown masses. What's the alt-right's evidence? They like to point out that in 2016, Israel passed a law blocking all internet porn sites by default, requiring users to contact their ISP if they want access. In other words, the alt-right claims the Jews know that porn is bad for you, they only want to spread the virus to other societies. Another piece of evidence that alt-right cites over and over again is an article published in Jewish Quarterly 14 years ago, written by Nathan Abrams, now a film studies professor at Bangor University in Wales, with a new book out on Stanley Kubrick. Abrams argues that Jews have been and continue to be disproportionately influential in the American porn industry. He discusses figures such as Reuben Sterman, who built an adult bookstore empire and became the nation's largest smut distributor during the 1970s and 80s, and Al Goldstein, the Screw magazine co-founder, who first outed J. Edgar Hoover and gave Deep Throat its first signal boost. There's also Seymour Butts, Stephen Hirsch, the founder of Vivid Entertainment, for years the largest studio in the world, and actors like Ron Jeremy and Nina Hartley. Why does Abram think there's a disproportionate presence in adult films? He suggested it was the same reason they dominated Hollywood from early on. It was an industry with a low barrier of entry and little respect from polite society. Plus, unlike other industries, there was no discrimination against Jewish people. As you can imagine from this article, Abrams has been getting crazy emails about it for a decade. The alt-right take advantage of his legitimacy as a scholar, always making sure to mention he's a professor, not a crank. But at the same time, they hold his scholarship in contempt. They say it's evidence that Jews aren't just undermining Western civilization, they're actually bragging about it. But Abrams says this conspiracy theory is nothing new. It's the latest incarnation of a long-standing association of Jewish people with prostitution, STDs, and perversion. Hitler spent several pages of Mein Kampf bemoaning the spread of syphilis via Jewish pimps and prostitutes, which he feared could jeopardize the continuation of the Aryans. The Nazis even had an umbrella term for prostitution, porn, homosexuality, abortion, and other forms of sexual degeneracy, sexual Bolshevism, which, like the cultural Marxism, the alt-right blames everything on. So I've made so many videos about cultural Marxism, Jordan Peterson, and just general alt-right pipelines, but you can see why they believe this stuff. And we're going to tie it back to the Frankfurt School a bit later, because we didn't actually talk about them much so far. But there was someone who was part of the Frankfurt School who was very instrumental in many people, especially in America, believing in this Jewish conspiracy to undermine Western values. And while on the surface it may seem like quite comical that people on the far right are associating like No Fap, No Nut November to this, it is pretty clear, like with many things, when you actually delve into the bigotry behind it, it is still like a massively wide held belief on the far right. And I also want to make the point that American conservatism is a far right ideology that is fundamentally anti-Semitic in its conspiracy theories about cultural Marxism or critical race theory and policing of sexuality as well, because the only thing they don't say these days is the Jewish part, because they pretty much say everything else and infer this type of thing. And they basically infer the Jewish part by talking about the Frankfurt School. Now, not totally in line with these conspiracy theories, but adjacent to them, and obviously people who generally subscribe to them, the Proud Boys are also big on NoFap. You know, the Proud Boys, this Western chauvinist gang that has been outlawed in places like Canada, are still very big in the US. So I quickly want to talk about their weird rituals and why they do this. So just going back to the Vice article. So recently, anti-masturbation and anti-porn has found a home again with the rise of the alt-right. One of the tenets of the Proud Boys is no wanks, meaning masturbation is forbidden and a sign of weakness. Individual Proud Boys may find that giving up masturbation improves their sex lives, strengthens their relationships, and helps them focus more fully on creating the happy traditional families that the organization holds so dear. But en masse, members of the Proud Boys who adhere to this are being asked to give up a core aspect of their individuality and relationship with themselves, abandoning a potential moment of self-exploration and connection in pursuit of a group cohesion. So an article on Medium, why are the Proud Boys so obsessed with this? So beginning with a black liberal comedian and self-help guru named Dante Nero, who turned Proud Boys founder Gavin McInnes on the idea, for Nero, giving up fapping was a way to kickstart one's dating life rather than devoting energies towards porn and sex. A practitioner of NoFap could refocus his energies towards making a connection with another person, and indeed a kernel of that sentiment still remains. The Proud Boys website explains that it gets young men off the couch and talking to women, and it gets married men away from their computers and back into bed with their significant other. But there seems to be something more to it than merely a desire to encourage Proud Boys to have healthier relationships, and it's something that connects the Proud Boys to a long tradition of organizations that seek to ensure their members' loyalty by policing their sexual behavior. Although the organization positions its rejection of fapping as a way of pushing back against the decadence of modern liberal culture that's fueled by hookup apps and internet porn, a suspicion of self-pleasure is hardly a modern phenomenon. The Catholic Church has long positioned self-love as a sin, and various religious figures and moral leaders throughout history have cast aspersions on the practice. So the Proud Boys have loads of like weird cult stuff that they do, which is quite bizarre. And that one seems to kind of play into the conspiracy theories a bit, in that it's like it wants these men to procreate, meet like a woman and get married, have children, have this like nuclear family to preserve the West, playing into a lot of theories about what porn and things like that is doing to the West, in that it's making men, I guess, docile, emasculated, not wanting to have children, and that's all part of the conspiracy theory. So white people will become a minority and non-white people will become the majority, and then they will be controlled by this Jewish Marxist conspiracy. But like I said before, I hadn't really touched on the Frankfurt School too much, so now we're going to talk about Wilhelm Reich. And this is the member of the Frankfurt School who was the biggest on this sexual liberalization. He became quite an icon in the 60s because of this. And he's also the heart of all these conspiracy theories, including cultural Marxism. And he's part of the reason why people think like Jewish people are involved in this sinister plot using adult films and the adult film industry. So the BBC did a really, really good article about this, just talking about his life and him being a bit eccentric and a bit weird, but ultimately having a very, very big influence on people. So he tried to unite the ideas of Freud and Marx. He was a sexual liberationist who truly believed in a woman's right to pleasure, and he rooted his ideas about freedom in the body itself, which he saw as both a repository of trauma and an agent of change. Wilhelm Reich was born in 1879 into a wealthy family in what is now Ukraine. He is an ethnic Jew and his parents were Jewish, but they made him not practice it, I should say before we go on. He claimed to have lost his virginity at the age of 11 and to have visited a brothel at the age of 15. He served in the Austro-Hungarian army in World War I and studied medicine in Vienna. When he heard of a seminar on sex being given by Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, he visited him to ask for a reading list, and the pair hit it off. Freud began referring patients to him, and Reich started developing his own theories, becoming convinced on the power of sexual healing. Just going to the cultural Marxism Frankfurt School thing, just before World War II, Reich fled to the US, where his ideas became increasingly eccentric. He discovered a mysterious life force that permeated the universe and flowed through the atmosphere in currents. He called it the orgone and designed a cabinet, the orgone accumulator, in which a person could sit and soak up this energy. Reich thought spells in the box would cure cancer. So the US viewed him with suspicion, but didn't really care about him. So they took a dim view of Reich's claims about the powers of the accumulator, and the fact that he had embraced Marxism and joined the Communist Party in Austria in 1928 made him even more a suspicious figure in the eyes of the FBI. Reich was ordered to stop selling his accumulators and was subsequently arrested in 1956 for breaking the injunction. Tons of his papers and books were burned, and he died in prison in 1957. However, it's Reich's legacy which became really instrumental. It really outlived him. So Reich's fame grew to the point where in January 1964, Time magazine published a long article declaring Dr. Wilhelm Reich may have been a prophet. For now, it sometimes seems that all America is one big orgone box, and it says he influenced films like Barbarella and Woody Allen's film Sleeper. So Reich also believed in the idea of sexual liberation as a coherent strategy to oppose totalitarianism. It's an idea that was reflected in George Orwell's 1984. We shall abolish the orgasm, O'Brien tells Winston. Our neurologists are at work upon it now. Winston's girlfriend Julia, an orgasm enthusiast, explains why the party is anti-sex. If you're happy inside yourself, why should you get excited about Big Brother and the 3-year plans and the 2 minutes hate and all the rest of their bloody rot? We don't know for certain whether Orwell read Reich, but we do know that he read a piece about Reich. During the 60s and 70s, Reich became a figure for hippies and dreamers, thanks to the particular set of values he represented. Reich's mixture of patrician, intellectual, respectability, and fiercely anti-authoritarian politics, combined with his rallying cry for radical sexuality as the path to liberation, and his tragic death at the hands of American authorities, made him the perfect counter-cultural icon. In 1968, protesting students in Paris scrawled Reichian slogans on the wall of the Sorbonne, and in Berlin they hurled copies of The Mass Psychology of Fascism, his work, at the cops. Feminists of the 1970s were influenced by his thinking. Meanwhile, his ideas were typically popular with communes that began to flourish around this period, especially ones espousing free love. His sexual politics began to live out in experimental communities and gradually became more accepted, perhaps even integrated into wider society. So there you have an ethnic Jewish person who was a scholar and intellectual who advocated for sexual liberation for women and just for everyone. Had a bit, crazy conspiracy theories about certain things, but did seem to be very, very influential on so many people. Obviously spoke with Einstein, met with Freud, might have had an influence on George Orwell himself with his 1984 work, and of course had such an influence after he died on young protest movements, especially in the late 60s, talking about Paris there, talking about communes in the early 70s and late 60s as well. And of course, after his death, the adult film industry popped up and there were prominent Jewish people involved in that stuff. So to many of these people, it's just a continuation. This guy is like the heart of the problem, the heart of the cultural Marxist Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy coming to America. This guy who sought to undermine Western values, undermine the nuclear family, undermine all the views and the Puritan views on sex they had in America. So it's really, really not surprising that these guys who talk about pornography being like a Jewish conspiracy do also talk about cultural Marxism, and this guy specifically, to them, I guess, is the father of all this stuff. Now, there was an article on a Catholic website called Crisis, I believe, a couple years ago, which shows how these people pushing this cultural Marxism conspiracy are both deeply anti-Semitic, but still like to talk about Reich today. So by Austin Ruse, I couldn't find him on Twitter. I think he's actually been banned. Wouldn't be surprised based on the content of this article. So this is from 2015. So cultural Marxism is at the heart of our moral disintegration. Devil's Pleasure Palace by Michael Walsh explains there is something even more fundamental at the heart of the matter, and the sexual revolution is only part of it. What lay at the heart of the matter are cultural Marxism and critical theory. So that's a fun one. You got both of them in there. And the institute that spawned them, the Institute for Social Research, commonly known as the Frankfurt School. So Wilhelm Reich wanted to reconcile psychoanalysis with Marxism and believed that economic Marxism would fail because of the repressed sexuality of the proletariat. The cultural Marxists of the Frankfurt School believed economic Marxism would fail because of the resistance of the working class. They believed it could only be achieved by undermining the institutions, all of them. They began what they called the Long March through with the institutions. Critical theory is also central to their plan. More than likely, whether you know it or not, this is what you got in college and probably even in high school. This will sound familiar as the bromides you now hear from the students at the University of Zurich. Critical theory seeks societal transformation through the emancipation of mankind from all forms of slavery. The slavers happen to be the church, the family, and the free market. It's astonishing to think that this overtly Marxist institute, founded to undermine Western civilization, was actually invited to move its operation to Columbia University in 1935, so talking about when these guys fled to the US. From this lofty perch, these men began the drip of poison into American culture. So that article there is obviously like deeply, deeply anti-Semitic and talking about how these Jewish people were welcomed to the US and set out on poisoning the US culture. Now, part of the conspiracy theory that is so ridiculous is that the Frankfurt School was not only influential, it's literally like taken over academia. That's what people like Jordan Peterson believe. Like the disciples of the Frankfurt School have taken over academia everywhere in an effort to undermine Western civilization. But you can see now how you get something ridiculous like No Fap and No Nut November, and even like the Proud Boys view on this stuff, and how it comes from like a deeply racist place about subverting American values, Western values. So what you have here is the Frankfurt School with Wilhelm Reich coming to the US, publishing their work, publishing their like weird experiments and stuff like that. Then their work taking on a life of their own, being part of this sexual revolution in the 1960s and 1970s, Jewish people being involved in the adult film industry, that becoming an absolutely massive industry over the next 50 years. And then you can link that to the Proud Boys today, or just the alt-right today, who believe this was a purposeful plan set in motion by the Frankfurt School and the Jewish conspiracy to take over the world, to make white men docile, emasculated, no longer wanting to go out and meet women because they can get all their needs in terms of sex online through a computer screen. And that mainly ties in with the white replacement theory. So although like No Fap is like a massive meme, No Nut November is a massive meme, like many things like this, it's co-opted by the far right and co-opted by these conspiracy theories. But anyway, that is it for the No Fap videos. I'm sorry if this one was a bit more like information intensive. I really couldn't think of another way to get the information across. The other video was more enjoyable, more light-hearted, more fun. So if you haven't watched that, please go check that out. If you want to follow me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter and on Instagram. If you want to join our communities, check out my Discord and my Reddit. And if you want to support my work, please check out my Patreon. And if you've made it this far, thank you for watching.